Welcome to the Human Nature Channel. I'm your host, Alex Tamsel, and what am I doing here? Well, it's Tuesday night once again. Here I am at my dad's farm garage, which in my opinion is the best backdrop a YouTube video could have. And once again, it's about Alex trying to think on his feet. Now, I'm going to do something that is a time-honored tradition with guys who do talk shows and radio talk show hosts, I guess guys who do podcasts, and I'm going to talk about something that happened on my way over here, or I should say happened to me while I was doing the video that will show up at the end of this video, if that makes any sense. I did the musical version of this evening, and it will show up at the end. But while I was doing this, I broke something. And it was something that had been around for years and years, and I was really horrified by it. What it is, it's a Penn State coffee cup. Now, when I was doing the musical portion of this evening, the song, I'm standing here and I'm like moving around, and my elbow hit this coffee cup, and I turned and watched it fall on its side. It's sitting on top of the boiler, by the way. I hit it with my elbow, it fell on its side, it rolled off the boiler, it hit the floor, and the only thing that was broken was the handle. And I'm like, okay. So I reached down and I'm cleaning up these little ceramic bits, and I actually cut my finger, and I'm bleeding. I'm like, I'm in the middle of doing like versions of the song. I went ahead and did the song, you'll see. I'll tell you what the song is when I'm done talking, but that is what happened. So I ended up getting this emotional charge from, trying to navigate this disaster. I mean, look at this. When I take it out of the microwave oven, it's hot. I'm like, I missed that handle. But anyway, the coffee is cooled now, so I can drink it, so, big deal. So this is known as the opening, talking about something that happened. And then I move into the meat of the first theme, which is something I've been talking about in the last videos, which is the word which amazes me, because when you're talking in front of a camera and you're trying to wing it, the word sneaks up behind you with a razor and slits your throat. It's horrible. How do I defeat this demon, this monster that just won't leave me alone? Well, the solution was take a piece of paper about this big and scotch tape it to a medicine chest, and written on it is the word So I'm looking at it. And so I spent the last week between doing this video and the last video going, how can I defeat the word I know it's going to sneak up behind me and, kick me up behind the knee. It's done it more and more times than I can remember. So I ended up going, wait, the solution is not just one piece of paper scotch taped to something with something written on it, but all of these pieces of paper, these little pieces of paper, something written on it, scotch taped to everything. It's like, there it was, the solution was right in front of me. A piece of paper with something written on it and scotch taped to the microwave, the wall, In fact, don't be surprised if you see, like this one of these days. Oops, well, that wasn't so hard. But anyway, I covered the broken cup, a piece of paper with tape on it. Now we're coming up to the solution to the problem of the word and basically that comes down to little pieces of paper scotch taped over everything. So right before I'm about to say the word I'll just grab one of these pieces of paper. I'll grab one of these pieces of paper and read what is on it. Okay, this is from last week. The inserted error. I don't even remember what that means, to be quite honest. The inserted, why would anybody insert an error? I have no idea. Okay, the next one, the cone is bigger out the nose. Now, that I understand. That's not so cryptic. I have these books on voice. I have this one book, I think it's called Your Voice or something like that. And it has blurbs on the back from Walter Matthau, the actor, Harry Belafonte, the singer. This is I read it once, I'm reading it, it's a serious book on voice. Actually, keep this in mind. as you're speaking, you have two cones of sound, one out the mouth, one out the nose. So that's the whole business about the cone is bigger out the nose. I don't know if that's true, but I did write that down. Okay, here's one. In 2001, we're talking about Stanley Kubrick's movie. In 2001, the thin side edge of the monolith is the Stargate, you dope. I don't know. But anyway, since the Human Nature channel, it talks on politics. I mean, I don't know if the tabs ever show up so anybody can see them. But, it's the tabs are basically politics, humor, adventures on YouTube, media. Those are my tabs. So I think it's a good idea to actually identify myself politically. I haven't done so up to this point. Yes, I am a registered Republican. Yes, there's an R after my name. Okay. I've had people say to me, why did you sell your soul to the devil? Well, there's a reason. Okay. Because really what I am basically, the way a guy like Sticks and Hex and Hammer is a libertarian, and like how guys like James Corbett are, they're anarchists, they're, what was the term for that? What was the term he gave for that? Peer-to-peer, excuse me. James Corbett, peer-to-peer anarchism. They have these categories that they put themselves in. What would I be? Well, I'm a reformist. I believe in reform. I mean, as much as I respect James Corbett and the research he does, I do kind of have a problem with the peer-to-peer society, his version of anarchism, because I just, see exceptions. But I will talk about that a little bit later. But with me, it's about reform. I'm more like a Teddy Roosevelt type of Republican, in the spirit of the trust busters. And we don't want any monopolies around here. We're going to split you up in a whole bunch of, different groups, and you can compete among yourselves. Even though John D. Rockefeller, who owned Standard Oil, who was the subject, the target of this antitrust legislation, this antitrust push, anti-monopoly, he ended up keeping shares. He ended up having a controlling interest in all of the oil companies that were split up, like it became Esso and Atlantic and Sunoco. What had happened was it broke up, and he became even richer than he ever was. So there's limits to being a reformer, but I'm still a reformer. I still believe in it, and I don't think anybody in the Democratic Party is interested in the issue of reform. Now, I'll tell you something about myself. By all rights, I should be a liberal Democrat. I should be that guy. I'll tell you why. There's a word I'm again. My dad is a retired auto worker, okay? And growing up, it's a blue-collar family. We're living on a farm. We're doing pretty good. But that's what it is. My parents would never vote for a Republican presidential candidate, for example. They just never do it. This goes back, let's say, 40 years, when I'm just like coming out of my teenage years and, past the age of 21. The way it looked back then was the Democrats represented the unions and Republicans represented the management. So, it was like there was kind of a balance. You knew there was like this middle area where people would eventually come to some kind of compromise agreement, some sort of trade-offs that made everybody happy. That's kind of how it was then. Today, I wouldn't feel comfortable in the Democratic Party because I'd be so alone. Nobody would be interested in a reformer. I'll tell you what, if there was a reform party, I'd be its candidate for president. I'd probably be its only member, so I'd have to be the candidate for president. No, but I believe in reform. I seriously do. Teddy Roosevelt, even going back before he was president, I think he was police commissioner of New York City. Back then, the Republicans were seen as reformers. The Democrats had control for years and years and years. Finally, some Republicans get elected. We're cleaning up the graft. We're cleaning up the crony capitalism, the under the table stuff. We're gonna try and clean some of that up. So, I believe in reform. I believe that there should be more inspector generals. I think we should have, Here I'm going to go off on the Department of Homeland Security. It would be nice if instead of a Department of Homeland Security, we had a Department of Inspector Generals who just went out and looked under every rock, made sure that every I was dotted, every T was crossed, every column of numbers added up, because the American people deserve no less. This is the way I see it. No, they really don't. I am not a fan of the Department of Homeland Security. I know how it came about. You have to go back to 2002. I believe what had happened, and here's the story I read back then, and when it comes to like news, all right, I'm just telling you, this is what I read. It was Dick Cheney and it was Joe Lieberman, senator from Rhode Island at the time, proposes a Department of Homeland Security to George Herbert Walker, or George W. Bush. And initially George W. was a little bit resistant. I guess there was still a twinge of small government conservatism there, but apparently Cheney and Lieberman made the case that a Department of Homeland Security is just what this nation needs. It will streamline our intelligence efforts. It will make America safer, blah, 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 blah. What it ended up doing was created a committee to oversee the Department of Homeland Security, and Joe Lieberman became the chairman of that department, so this guy basically created himself a job. The worst thing about the Department of Homeland Security was it took FEMA out of the cabinet. Right? FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, was originally in the cabinet. It was in the cabinet during 9/11. In fact, FEMA was in New York on September 10th, 2001 doing drills. They were already there. The reason FEMA being in the cabinet is a good idea is because as a cabinet level position, it can get to the president with ground level information that the president should hear. I mean, really. Okay, Mr. President, this is what's going on here at Ground Zero. And I'm sure President Bush, factored it all in. After we get to the Department of Homeland Security, which I think comes about in October 2002, there was an office of the Department of Homeland Security prior to that. Former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge was the head of that. But then we end up getting DHS as we know it today. And I'll tell you what about George W. Bush, W. Personal opinion, the guy gets a bad rap on some things. Maybe not everything. But on some things, yes, he does get a bad rap, and he gets a seriously bad rap on Katrina. And the reason that is because he basically said to Cheney and Lieberman, oh, okay, go ahead. It made Katrina worse than it should have been, okay? I mean, everybody tried to pin Katrina on W. All right, what else? What do you expect, from the news media and people who have got nothing better to do? But it was much more complicated than that. You have to factor in Mayor of New Orleans, Ray Nagin, just not being ready. It's just the events overtook him. Governor Mary Landrieu initially telling the Bush administration, oh no, everything's fine. We got this under control. Everything's cool. What you have to understand was when Katrina came through, it came through actually during the night, early in the morning. So there was like the morning period where I'm watching the Today Show down in New Orleans. There is Matt Lauer, there is Harry Connick Jr. Harry Connick Jr. is like in hip waders. He's like in about a foot of water. He's like, yeah, we dodged the bullet. Little did they know the levees in that one parish. Oh, it's right on the tip of my tongue. The lower parish, whatever, the 15th or something, 15th Ward, I think that's what it was. Nobody had any idea that stuff was getting ready to go until it went, and then it was too late. Now think about this. If the Department of Homeland Security was still a cabinet-level position, it's one step closer to the president, and George Bush became the victim of the bubble. And what I mean by that was he had this schedule ahead of him, and he was scheduled to do all these speaking events. They couldn't penetrate that presidential bubble. It's unfortunate, but I think that kind of happened there. You have to understand, the Department of Homeland Security is now the controlling authority over FEMA. FEMA answers to the Director of Homeland Security. You had the head of FEMA at that time, Michael Brown, who, as far as I know, the only thing this guy ever really did prior to this position in government was run a racetrack. And then you had Michael Chertoff. These two guys didn't go along. So you end up you slip in this extra layer of bureaucracy. So you don't have a FEMA director who can get on the phone with the president saying, we've got a disaster happening here, and it's going to really, really look bad on all of us. You know, that's what it would have taken. So I'm not a fan of the Department of Homeland Security. Not only do I think it needs reformed, I think it was a big waste of money in the first place, personally. If I could magically transform it into the Department of Inspector Generals, I would do that. That's what we need. We need Inspector Generals. Now, since I've ragged on, okay, well, I'm a political reformer, okay, I took care of that. Department of Homeland Security, okay, fix that. Now, what do we have left? James Corbett, who I mentioned earlier, and the DHS. Now, I don't know if any of you follow the Corbett Report. I am a big fan of the Corbett Report. Anytime there's a new Corbett Report or Corbett Report Extras that comes up, I watch it. Mr. Corbett is also, has a cooperative, partnership with James Pilato of Media Monarchy. And they do a dual show called New World Next Week. Generally, it's weekly unless these guys are busy with other things, but I always watch them. I like what they do a great deal. The investigative journalist side of it, the muckraking side of it is wonderful. Mr. Corbett's innovation is its crowdsourced investigation. So people send him stuff, okay, and he collates it and puts it all together. He recently did a three-part YouTube video. It's basically the World War I conspiracy. It's the secret history of World War I. Telling you what you'd never heard about guys like Cecil Rhodes, the guy behind the Rhodes Scholarships, who died in, I guess it was 1900. But he and a Lord Milner from England had a plan that was irresistible to guys who want to make a lot of money. Excellent series. I do love what Mr. Corbett does, and actually it coincides with some stuff. Woodrow Wilson, by the way, was a puppet. He was a puppet of Colonel Edwin House, the son of a Confederate smuggler who was a Rhett Butler character. This guy was very, very wealthy, and he basically pulled the strings with Wilson. And Colonel Edward Townhouse, that's it, had his connections with, the British insiders, the British, the Old Boy Network, that sort of thing. But anyway, fascinating stuff. But you have to understand, just like I have identified myself as a reformer, I have this feeling that inside the Republican Party, I might find a kindred soul or two. The Democratic Party, where, like I said, as a blue-collar kid, I should have a natural affinity to. Oh, I can be like bleeding heart, guilty white liberal like you never believed if I really wanted to. But, not really. I kind of like being the reformer. I like the idea of a reform movement. Reform's kind of interesting. I do believe that inside the Republican Party I might find kindred souls, which I think I've just said. Hold on. So I have to put James Corbett into perspective. James Corbett is an anarchist. I know he's a particular type of anarchist. There's all sorts of different versions. When I say anarchist, you might think of the type of guy who just wants to burn everything to the ground and go, no, nobody will have to tell us what to do. Or, But Mr. Corbett isn't like that. It's he believes in a peer-to-peer anarchy. No government, just a peer-to-peer society. So when somebody poses him the question, James, you don't believe in government. You believe government should be gotten away with, totally. And he's like, yes. And who would build the roads? And his answer is the road builders. Well, okay. I generally sort of get the idea. I would actually like to sit down someday. And I'm not even talking about doing it like on camera. I mean, just as a discussion. I have questions about his peer-to-peer vision of a governmentless society, how it would still work. Because I have two problems with it. The first problem is I can think of exceptions immediately to this peer-to-peer society, this peer-to-peer economy. Who would do the policing? Well, the police. Who would do the lawyering? The lawyers. Yeah, you would have exceptions immediately. Parent-child. Well, there's an exception. Teacher-student. There's an exception. Fireman-fire chief. There you go. See, here's the thing. There would be exceptions, and the reason is because hierarchies are ubiquitous in nature, and that including human nature, which, hey, this happens to be the Human Nature channel, so I guess that fits right in. I'm a big fan of Howard Bloom, author of The Lucifer Principle, author of The Global Brain, who, by the way, has a YouTube channel, and he talks about all sorts of things. Basically, he's been ragging on Donald Trump. I comment on his channel because, Howard, I love you, but, basically you're taking the Washington Post and the New York Times at face value, and I don't. So, I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. But anyway, hold on. Yes, the Human Nature channel, hierarchies. This is what I would, coming from Howard Bloom, it's basically, he had said in The Global Brain that hierarchies are ubiquitous. From bacteria colonies all the way up to human beings, you are going to have hierarchies. They're just going to form naturally. And the government is just a reflection of a hierarchy, Now, there was somebody, he is on YouTube. I'm not going to mention the guy's name, but he is a pretty good, he's a viable YouTuber. I think he keeps his machine running and makes a buck off it. He sells t-shirts. Anyway, I used to watch this guy for a while until I started getting tired of the anti-cop trip. But anyway, I was also following him on Twitter, and he happens to be a volunteerist anarchist too. He takes a lot of cues from James Corbett. James Corbett really does a whole lot of heavy lifting. This other guy's okay. He's really slick, but, I sell your t-shirts, which is the crux of the issue. He used to sell his t-shirts, and talking about selling his t-shirts, he'd say, buy these t-shirts. There a conversation started. Now, I'm taking this guy at face value, and I think he actually wants a vigorous debate. Right? The way he talked about, there are conversation starters, you want a really vigorous debate, this sort of thing. So, this guy happened to be on Twitter, and he said, hey, I'll give you an ounce of gold if you tell me why government is useful. So I took him up on his challenge, and I proposed this scenario to him. I says, well, here's how government is useful. Let us say we had some urban disaster. A jet plane crashes into a suburban neighborhood. You've got, broken gas lines exploding. Houses are exploding all over the place. So let's say you have 10 men who are trapped with all these flames going on around them. And I will apply the rule of 10 to this situation. The rule of 10 basically says, pick 10 of anything. 10 DVDs, CDs, politicians, books, whatever you can think of. 10 cars. When you have the rule of 10 applied, you can assume that 3 will be substandard of this group. The next 3 will be, sort of average. The next 3 will be good. And the number 10th item in this set will be great. So applied to these guys who are now trapped in this urban inferno, the first 3 guys are basically like shitting and pissing themselves. They couldn't save themselves, whatever. I mean, they're just terrified out of their minds. The next 3 guys could probably follow directions to save their lives. The next 3 guys would probably be professionals of some kind, guys who had been in the military, law enforcement guy, first responder, emergency service person, those sorts of guys who are basically used to dealing in crisis situations. And then the 10th guy would somebody who would have leadership abilities, who had been maybe a colonel in the military or something like that, a chief of police, who knows. So anyway, the last 4 guys would keep the first 6 guys alive. That's how I saw it, and that's how I presented it to this fellow on Twitter. And he's like saying something like, well, you're just being dishonest. That's leadership. That's not government. And I'm like, I got the degree in English literature. I know synonyms when I see it. Leadership is a form of governance. I'm sorry. I think this guy was playing word games with me because obviously, like I said, fireman, fire chief, there's got to be somebody in charge. You're going to have somebody in charge. You're going to have government whether you like it or not. Governance, if you go back to the original Greek and Latin words, it basically means steering a ship. So, I got all excited about that guy on Twitter and I blocked him. But here's the funny thing. I started thinking about the Department of Homeland Security. I started thinking about expanding the Inspector General class, having like 3 times as many of them, and turning over every rock, making sure you accounted for every penny, because we're just sons of bitches and we don't give a fuck. We're nasty. That's all it is to it. We are the people's hammer. You don't like it? Work at McDonald's. I mean, I'm really getting excited about this. So anyway, here was my thought. You get the Department of Homeland Security and you make it the Department of the Inspector General. You still got the building. You just tell everybody, well, you're fired, and then we hire all these new people and put them in place. So now we got all these Inspector Generals and I thought the Department of Inspector General should be headed by James Corbett. Because James Corbett hates government. I'm not kidding. I mean, wait a second. This is what James Corbett thinks about government. I hope I don't forget myself and drink that later. But no, he really does. So I thought James Corbett would be perfect to be the director of Homeland Inspector General. Yeah, the Department of Homeland Inspector General. Yeah, I like that so much better. The Department of Homeland Inspector General. James Corbett, he hates government. He'll turn over every rock. He'll make sure everything's as clean as a whistle. But the irony is, because James Corbett hates government, he'd never take the job. Oh, my head. Oh. The irony is almost too much. But I can pull down this piece of paper. Yeah, more scraps of paper next week. I'm going to have scraps of paper all over the place. This is the key to running my mouth as long as I can, which is really the idea. YouTube is just a big money chase, and you just got to be a talk machine. A few more things before we end. If George W. Bush, instead of signing the Homeland Security Act of 2002 and creating that agency, if he had vetoed it and said, hey, I'm going to veto this, I think it's unnecessary, but if you want to overturn my veto, go right ahead. If it's what the American people think they really, really need, I'm good with it. If he had done that, he would have had cover on Katrina, because he could have said, hey, taking FEMA out of the cabinet made this worse. Don't look at me. Well, he could have. What could have been? The other thing before we finish up, I was chatting with my next door neighbor about computer stuff and other shit. And I talked about people I follow on YouTube, and I mentioned Tim Pool. He said, I watched Tim Pool. I'm like, no kidding. Oh. Tim Pool is going to be somebody very, very significant in the future. He's really good at what he does. I have a lot of admiration for Tim Pool. And the very, very final thing is the song coming up next is on the cover of the Rolling Stone, written by Shel Silverstein and popularized by Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show. Ha ha ha, I don't believe it. Da da, I don't touch it. Hey Ray, hey Sugar, tell them who we are. Well, we're big rock singers, we got golden fingers, and we're loved everywhere we go. That sounds like us. We sing about beauty and we sing about truth at $10,000 a show. Right, we take all kind of pills that give us all kind of thrills, but the thrill we've never known is the thrill that'll get you when you get your picture on the cover of the Rolling Stone. Rolling Stone, wanna see my picture on the cover. Stone, wanna buy 5 copies for my mother. Yes, Stone, wanna see my smiling face on the cover of the Rolling Stone. That's a very, very good idea. I got a freaky old lady named Cocaine Katie who embroiders on my jeans. I got my poor old gray-haired daddy driving my limousine. Now it's all designed to blow our minds, but our minds won't really be blown like the blow that'll get you when you get your picture on the cover of the Rolling Stone. Rolling Stone, wanna see our pictures on the cover. Stone, wanna buy 5 copies for our mothers. Yeah, Stone, wanna see my smiling face on the cover of the Rolling Stone. Hey, I know how. Rock and roll. Ah, that's beautiful. We got a lot of little teenage blue-eyed groupies who do anything we say. We got a genuine Indian guru who's teaching us a better way. We got all the friends that money can buy, so we never have to be alone. And we keep getting richer, but we can't get our picture on the cover of the Rolling Stone. Rolling Stone, gonna see my picture on the cover. Stone, gonna buy 5 copies for my mother. Ah, Stone, gonna see my smiling face on the cover of the Rolling Stone. On the cover of the Rolling Stone, gonna see my picture on the cover. I don't know why we ain't on the cover, baby. Stone, gonna buy 5 copies for my mother. We're beautiful subjects. Stone, wanna see my smiling face. I ain't kidding. We would make a beautiful cover. On the cover of the Rolling Stone. Fresh shot right up front, man. I can see it now. We'll be up in front. Smiling, man. Ah, beautiful.